From the Radio Cafe and the Quivira Coalition, this is Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. In a moment, we're going to be talking to Ben Goldfarb, an environmental writer who's written a fabulous book called Eager, which is about beavers and their unsung contributions to the natural world. Not only is this book incredibly well written, with a sense of humor and vividly told stories of people and places, but it also is, I think, important in that it gives us a sense of what these little mammals did historically, namely, they made landscapes a whole lot wetter, and what they could do now if we'd give them half a chance, which could be of particular interest to people living in dry states and managing land for drought. All that is coming up in just 1 minute. Save the date for Regenerate 2019. The Quivira Coalition, Holistic Management International, and the American Grass-Fed Association will collaborate again to convene ranchers, farmers, environmentalists, land managers, scientists, medical professionals, nutritionists, students, teachers, and others for 4 days, November 19th through 22nd, 2019 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to explore ideas of health from the soil up. Get those dates on your calendar and we'll see you next fall. We're also inviting proposals for speakers, plenary talks, and roundtable sessions that focus on this year's theme, Health from the Soil Up. Recommend yourself or someone else. To submit a proposal, go to quiviracoalition.org/regenerate-CFP. Chelsea Green Publishing, an employee-owned company, is recognized as a leader in content about organic farming and gardening, homesteading, local food systems, restorative living, regenerative agriculture, and diet-focused integrative health, publishing expert authors that bring in-depth practical knowledge to life in books, ebooks, and audiobooks. Go to chelseagreen.com and enter code DTE30 at checkout to receive a special Down to Earth podcast discount on your next print book purchase. And be sure to sign up for their newsletter and stay up to date on all their new releases. Chelsea Green Publishing, cultivating change from the ground up. I'm very happy now to welcome Ben Goldfarb. He's an award-winning environmental journalist, and he's author of the new book, Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks so much for having me.
This is such a great book. It's fascinating. I really had not thought all that much about beavers before, and they are, as you write, one of the few non-human animals on this planet that really, really alters its environment by cutting down trees, building dams. They play a huge role in ecosystems that goes back millions of years, far predating human effect on the planet. How did you get interested in beavers and become what's called a beaver believer?
Yeah, how did I end up in the cult of beaver belief? Well, yeah, I think like a lot of people, I'd always had some appreciation for beavers and what they do. I'd spend a lot of time hiking and fishing and camping and being outside, and I'd certainly been around beavers and kind of admired their work ethic and their construction. But it wasn't really until a few years ago I was living in Washington State, where I still live today, and I happened to meet a beaver biologist. This guy, Kent Woodruff, who was then working for the U.S. Forest Service, and Kent was the founder of this project called the Methow Beaver Project, where they basically live trapped, quote unquote nuisance beavers that were clogging up road culverts or flooding farmers' fields or what have you in the Methow Valley in kind of north central Washington. And they would live trap those beavers and relocate them up into the kind of the headwaters of streams up in public land in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. And it was going out there with Kent to some of the sites where he had relocated beavers and seeing just how profoundly transformed those sites were. And they were just dramatically altered from being these little tiny single thread streams to these spectacular life-filled wetlands and marshes and swamps. It was seeing that incredible transformation that made me realize that beavers are not just some, fun little rodent that's out there building dams. They're actually dramatically altering North American landscapes at a scale that's hard for us to imagine. So that was when I sort of converted to beaver belief, as just seeing the magnitude of those impacts in Washington, which is a pretty dry place in sort of arid central Washington. And they're just, by storing water up there, they're just doing unbelievable amounts of important work.
So, how do they actually do it? What do beavers do that so improves the landscape, especially where water storage is concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, beavers build dams, right? That's the famous beaver behavior. And by building those dams, they're just capturing giant amounts of water in many cases, many, many acre feet of water. They're basically creating reservoirs. They're slowing water down, they're spreading it out. Of course, when you look at a beaver pond, there's all of that visible surface water, but what you often don't see is that the water, sinking into the ground, recharging aquifers, raising water tables, essentially sub-irrigating entire lush valleys. So that's a pretty big deal, is that water storage and rehydration component. The slowing, spreading, sinking, storing of water is a big deal, especially in New Mexico and other pretty dry states. We know that water is life, and so many creatures, from amphibians to trout to songbirds to waterfowl, are attracted to wetlands. Wetlands are just 2% of the total land area in the West, but hold 80% of the biodiversity. So wetlands are just playing this critical role both for human water users and fish, wildlife, plants as well.
The extent to which beavers played a role in creating the landscapes on this continent are coming to be better understood. And I thought it was so interesting in your book that it doesn't necessarily conform to our picture of sort of pristine landscapes. What did this continent look like in places where beavers lived? What was that effect that beavers had that we're not really seeing now because they've been so widely extirpated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the primary effect. Well, first, I mean, no question that North America was once a wetter, lusher, greener place. A lot of what I try to do in the book is basically read old trappers and explorers journals as they describe some of these landscapes before beaver trapping, and it's just amazing to read descriptions of places that we think of today as being pretty fundamentally arid, including New Mexico and eastern Washington, eastern Wyoming, and just reading descriptions of the incredible marshes and wetlands that explorers found there is really amazing, and a lot of that was thanks to beavers. But I also think that they played a critical role in increasing stream complexity. I think that we tend to look at a stream, or we envision a healthy stream as kind of this single threaded channel rushing through a valley. It's narrow, it's shallow. You could leap or wade across the channel. It's got a gravel bed. It's free flowing. The kind of stream that you would see in a fly fishing magazine. And those are the kinds of streams that, hey, I've fished all my life as well. But beavers don't create that kind of stream. They build these dams. They spread water out. They turn these single threaded channels into complex braided systems. They create pools and backwaters and eddies and meandering side channels. There are dead and dying trees all over the place in a beaver complex. They're just really dramatically increasing the complexity of the habitat in a way that we don't take for granted. So before we eliminated several 100 million beavers in North America, there's no question that many of the streams that today are just these straight, single-threaded, eroded, incised channels were much more complex and much more interesting in a lot of ways, I think.
And they gave rise to so many other species of both animals and plants around them because of exactly that scenario you describe.
Yeah, absolutely. Out here in Washington, where I live, my favorite bumper sticker is "Beavers taught salmon to jump." I think that really gets at the evolutionary connection. I think between those two species. But I mean, certainly there are all kinds of critters. Boreal toads in the Southwest are basically obligate beaver pond breeders. That's where they breed, is in beaver ponds. So moose. In many places, scientists just map the extent of moose habitat by just looking at beaver ponds. And, wherever beavers are, that's where moose can be. There are all of these animals that rely on these watery habitats. And, when we trapped out beavers, I don't think we really think about beaver trapping in the same way that we think about the deforestation of New England, or the busting of the Midwestern prairie for agriculture. We don't think about trapping as being this kind of early ecological catastrophe, but in many ways and for many creatures, I think that it was.
Now, as you say, untold numbers of beavers were hunted, were trapped for their pelts, which are these kind of miraculous natural phenomena of warm fur, and one can sort of understand. And you sort of admit this in the book. I mean, you run your hand over one of these things, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
And for that reason, they were hunted and trapped to near extinction here and in Europe. But they're a very resilient species, and they've bounced back. Tell us about that era of trapping and why it came to an end.
So I think that it's hard to overstate the extent to which the beaver pelt trade drove post-colonial early American history. I mean, when European colonists, having wiped out their own beaver species, or virtually wiped out their own beaver species, when they arrived in North America, they found this fantastic, largely untapped beaver resource. And beavers, along with timber and cod, were two of the kind of the crucial economic resources. I mean, when the Pilgrims arrived in New England, they owed lots of money to their creditors back in Europe, and they could only repay those debts by shipping beaver pelts back across the Atlantic. I mean, beavers made they made the Plymouth colony and the Massachusetts Bay colony possible. In New Mexico, it was the beaver trade that drew white people west from St. Louis. People like Kit Carson were following the Santa Fe Trail to this spectacular beaver resource in the Sangre de Cristo. So it was beavers that drove so much of the early white exploration and colonization of North America. And then, eventually by the kind of the middle of the 19th century, we just had mostly destroyed that resource. It's really incredible how quickly we wiped out beavers. I mean, the thing about beavers is that because they build these dams and lodges, they're pretty easy to find on the landscape, and thus pretty easy to kill. So, in so many places, we basically eliminated these critters in a couple of decades. And that was basically the end of it. And and the other thing that happened as well was as silk started reaching Europe from China, the fur hat kind of went out of style in favor of the silk hat. So it was sort of a combination of the elimination of the beaver resource and the arrival of this new form of hat making material that basically ended the fur trade.
Even after hunting and trapping ended, beavers have been considered nuisance animals and pests, and they're still trapped for that reason. But that's changing, at least in some places, where their contribution to ecosystems is being recognized. Give us some examples of how beavers are actually being recognized for their contribution and being used, especially out here in the West.
Yeah, I mean there are so many fantastic examples, including many in the agricultural community. I think that one of the great examples that I talk about in the book is in northeast Nevada in Elko County, which like New Mexico is a very arid place, and there many streams had been just totally hammered by a century essentially of unmanaged grazing. Cattle had just eliminated all of the riparian willow and aspen and cottonwood and other forms of browse, and as a result, a lot of stream banks have kind of destabilized and streams had incised. And that's obviously a very common phenomenon in the American West. We have hundreds of thousands of stream miles that have been damaged by sort of unmanaged land use. So there, what the Bureau of Land Management did essentially was they just put in, some pretty common sense managed grazing prescriptions. They didn't kick cows off the land or anything like that. They just, fenced some stream corridors, changed the grazing rotations a little bit, and really got some great vegetation recovery. In a couple of streams in particular, Maggie Creek and Susie Creek are sort of the famous case studies. And as that vegetation recovered, beavers just sort of magically found their way back. They have this fantastic way of just finding habitat on the landscape. And when the beaver showed up, of course, they built dams, they created these fantastic ponds and wetlands that provided these amazing water sources for livestock. So, in 2012, when drought hit Elko County, the only guys who had water on their grazing allotments were the guys who had beavers on their allotments. And not only were these fantastic water sources, they were also, the beavers were essentially irrigating these valleys, and they continue to do this. So, lots of ranchers reported dramatically increased grass production in their allotments, which of course meant, more weight on their cows and more money in their pockets. So now in Northeast Nevada, which is, in some ways not a very wildlife friendly place, there's this fantastic pro beaver cluster of ranchers because they've seen these really fantastic irrigation benefits essentially on their allotments.
Which is so interesting because beavers have been considered a nuisance by many people working in agriculture. There are places like here in New Mexico where there aren't very many beavers because cattle are making their habitat impossible. How do ranchers or how do people doing land management that involves livestock accommodate both cattle and beavers?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question because as you say, I mean, there's beavers and cows are basically competitors, right? I mean, the cows love to eat streamside, riparian vegetation, right? They eat beaver food, and not just cows too. I mean, in lots of places where we've lost predators like wolves and wild ungulates, deer and elk are overpopulated. They can be really big beaver competitors as well. So, I think just getting grazing right is really critical. And it's not it's not stuff that groups like Quivira aren't already doing, right? It's just keeping cows out of stream corridors during the hot season. It's implementing a little bit of fencing here and there when it's necessary. It's shortening grazing rotations so that livestock aren't spending as long hammering a single place of riparian veg. It's pretty common sense stuff, I think, that a lot of producers are already doing all over the West, and in many places too. I mean, as these beavers come back, of course beavers got to eat and they got to build. So making sure that there's willow especially waiting for them, I think is pretty critical. So to accelerate some of these processes, restoration planting, I think can help a lot. Just getting some riparian plants established so that beavers have a food source when they show up. And this work is being done in New Mexico, up in the Jemez Mountains. There are groups that Wild Earth Guardians in particular is doing sort of beaver-based restoration, working with the U.S. Forest Service to kind of make some of these grazing allotments more beaver friendly. But I think a lot of this stuff. I mean, it's great that environmental groups are doing it, but the reason that the Nevada case study is so important, I think, is that there, producers did it themselves. They saw the benefits, and they essentially converted their neighbors, right? I mean, I think that's so crucial is finding those landowner voices, and there are lots of them, lots of ranchers who have worked with beavers and experienced wonderful benefits. It's getting those people to talk to their neighbors and colleagues. I think that's so important. Ranchers want to hear it from other ranchers. They don't want to hear it from me.
Right, right. Well, and it requires people to look at their land as complex systems, which, contemporary agriculture tends to look at land in more of a kind of industrial mindset rather than an ecosystem mindset. But when you switch over to really looking at this big ecosystem complex area that you happen to be working in and trying to make money in, it really changes how you see things and therefore how you then manage the land and your livestock.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And I mean, again, there are lots of people who are thinking about exactly that. I think that it's kind of classic Aldo Leopoldian ecology and conservation, right? I mean, if of course, he's one of New Mexico's most famous writers and thinkers, and I mean, the whole thinking like a mountain principle applies to beavers as well, right? I mean, he described when you eliminate predators, and wild ungulates, deer sort of proliferate. You get this sort of catastrophic loss of forests and vegetation. And I think that we have to think about that principle as it applies to managed grazing systems as well. As we have to manage grazing so that vegetation can recover, so that beavers can return and do and create these fantastic trophic cascades, essentially, benefit the entire system. So, yeah, thinking about managed ecosystems as ecosystems nonetheless. I think you're absolutely right about that.
And trophic cascades, ladies and gentlemen, basically means food webs where one creature affects another, affects another, affects another, which is what beavers do.
Yeah, sorry, that was a bit of jargon there. So thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, yeah. What about crop agriculture? Are beavers compatible with fruit and vegetable growing?
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't really know anybody who's doing that work. It's interesting. I would think so. But right now, I think that that the ranching community is probably a little bit further ahead on the beaver front than crop growers. And I mean, look, there's no question. I'm a beaver believer, obviously, but I'm not naive about what a pain in the butt beavers can be, right? I mean, if in irrigated agriculture, beavers love nothing more than to build an irrigation ditches, right? That's kind of a perfect dammable channel for beavers. So certainly they can cause issues, and I don't want to deny that. But again, I mean, I think that a really common sentiment that I hear among ranchers and crop farmers as well is like they really like having beavers in the watershed. They like having the beavers upstream, right? They don't want beavers on their allotment or on their private land, but they do like having beavers upriver, where they're basically slowing water down, storing it, prolonging irrigation seasons, essentially by keeping water on the landscape for longer. So I think that the understanding that beavers within the watershed is important. I think that understanding is certainly present and growing, and now kind of the next step, I think, is just figuring out ways to help producers manage beavers when they're on their own property or on their own allotment. Thinking about beavers not only as a kind of a public benefit, but a benefit to private landowners as well, and also giving those landowners resources and even potentially funding to deal with beaver issues. I mean, the way that we deal with wolves is we basically compensate ranchers for lost livestock, right? When we say that, hey, we the public like having wolves in the landscape, so we're going to help out you, the private landowner, when wolves kill your sheep or cow. And I think we have to start thinking about beavers in the same way, right? I mean, beavers are producing all of these fantastic public benefits, right? They're creating habitat for our fish and wildlife. They're storing our water. They're filtering our pollution. But for the typical guy who has a beaver in his irrigation ditch, or gets his apple tree cut down by a beaver, beavers are incurring a cost to him. So just kind of squaring those public benefits with the private costs, thinking about compensation mechanisms that would make landowners see beavers as an asset rather than a detriment. I think that's sort of where the beaver movement has to go, is just squaring those public benefits with the private costs.
New Mexico had one of the first laws in 1838, as I learned from reading your book, that prohibited the trapping of beavers and otters on the Rio Grande after an enormous slaughter of these river animals, though it was probably hard to enforce, right? But beavers are still not very common here in New Mexico. What's the status of beavers here, and is there a public movement? Are they recognized by our agencies as being a positive creature in some ways?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, every state is so different when it comes to beaver management in a lot of ways. Washington, where I live, is we're I think we're probably the most progressive state in the country when it comes to beaver management. New Mexico, unfortunately, is I think a bit further behind other states, or at least some other states, in various ways. I mean, one big shortcoming, in my opinion, in New Mexico's beaver policies, is that if you're going to live trap and relocate a beaver rather than lethally killing that beaver when it causes a problem, you actually have to get permission from all of the landowners within a 5 mile radius, which to me is sort of like, that just seems excessive, and it's almost guaranteed to prevent the relocation from being possible. The notion of finding every landowner within 5 miles to agree on anything is probably impossible.
But you're allowed to kill them.
You're allowed to kill them, yeah, but you can't trap them alive and move them. And again, in places like Washington, that's sort of been one of the primary mechanisms that we've used to recover our beaver populations is relocation. And in New Mexico, that's extremely challenging, I think. And the grazing issue is a big one as well. I'm not going to remember the exact numbers, but there was a study done on the kind of the prevalence of beavers on public land in New Mexico, and basically those researchers found that beavers were at a tiny fraction of their capacity or natural densities in other places. And the reason for that, again, is basically unmanaged grazing, and the fact that cows and wild ungulates as well are outcompeting beavers for forage. So on public lands in New Mexico, which could be fantastic beaver sanctuaries and places where beavers are helping us prepare for climate change in some ways by slowing down and storing water. Our New Mexico's public lands just aren't supporting beavers in the way they could be because of competition with cattle, essentially. So,
but it doesn't have to be that way.
No, right, exactly. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think the experience of ranchers in Nevada and Idaho and Eastern Washington, where there are lots of big beaver fans, I think that there's lots of experience showing that that beavers and cattle can get along just fine, and even in some ways enhance each other.
Well, and this is another question that comes up that really challenges our thinking. I mean, beavers have become highly politicized in some places where they're thought to be incompatible with other wildlife, like salmon, even though they coexisted with salmon forever. So, talk about that, how beavers coexist in a positive manner with other important wildlife, and the challenges that we face in really recognizing that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I mean, so certainly, in Washington, I mean, the reason that Washington is such a great beaver state, I think, is because of salmon. We funnel so much money into endangered salmonid recovery, and beavers are a fantastic strategy for creating great salmon habitat, right? I mean, they're basically creating these wonderful slow water refuges for juvenile fish, and there are lots of studies basically showing that beavers increase fish production in the Pacific Northwest. And the same thing is happening in the Southwest as well with cutthroat trout. Beavers are creating fantastic cutthroat habitat, and lots of the fishermen I know, and I'm a fisherman myself. We love to fish in beaver ponds, right? That's where the biggest fish are. I think the reason that we don't always recognize that connection is because we sort of suffer from this ecological amnesia, right? I mean, white people trapped out beavers 200 years ago from the West, and these landscapes kind of unraveled in beavers' absence, right? I mean, lots of streams just cut to bedrock without beaver dams slowing them down. We lost these fantastic wetlands that beavers had created, and by the time naturalists and biologists and ecologists sort of started observing these landscapes and studying them, they were decades post beaver, and the land had already really changed dramatically, and we kind of internalized that degradation as normal or natural because we didn't. Again, white Western scientists had no memory of a fully beavered landscape. So I think that we kind of failed to realize how historically important these creatures were because we have no cultural or scientific memory of it, but certainly we're learning how vital beavers are in creating habitat for fish, waterfowl, amphibians, all kinds of other creatures.
Even in otherwise environmentally progressive California, there's been a lot of anti beaver policy. And it's so interesting to see that contrast between Washington, where you live, and California, that you would think would really understand the value of these creatures. But for a long time, they were considered not even to really be a native species in a lot of parts of California.
Yeah, and I think that's really a testament to that ecological amnesia that I
Yeah.
was talking about. And you're exactly right. I mean, the story in California is pretty interesting. So there, before the overland trappers arrived, Kit Carson and Jedediah Purdy and the kind of the mountain men, there actually had been Russian and British and Spanish and American sea-bound merchants or yeah, ocean going fur trappers and traders, trading with indigenous people for sea otter and beaver pelts. So throughout the 18th century, beavers and otters were leaving California by the ocean. And so by the time the overland mountain men arrived in California, by the time they crossed the Sierra Nevada, the state had largely had its beavers removed already, and so they showed up, didn't see many beavers, and that notion that this was kind of a state where beavers were absent basically got enshrined in conventional wisdom, and eventually sort of made its way into the wildlife biology textbooks in California. And beavers were considered a non-native species in the Sierras, in the Bay Area, in Southern California, in many sort of Northern California coastal streams, and that just makes sort of no intuitive sense, right? I mean, beavers are everywhere from, Northern California to the Canadian tundra lines. There's really nothing keeping them out of California, but because we had essentially forgotten that these animals were there, or because the animals were removed before we ever noted their presence, or before white people noted their presence, we basically considered that we basically said they didn't belong.
There have been so many people, and you describe them in your book, and you've met many of them who are activists who are trying to bring beavers back, and sometimes successfully, sometimes not, depending on the place. We don't have time to go into every one of those stories, but I would encourage people to read the book because it's a very interesting set of tales and dramas, including people who have found ways to basically deal with quote unquote nuisance beavers without killing them. Is this like a trend that people are beginning to really follow? Is it catching on?
Yeah, I think slowly it is. Certainly I'd like to see more rapid and dramatic progress, but definitely, yeah, and the big non-lethal beaver management technique that's taking off now to some extent is this thing called the flow device, or the beaver deceiver is kind of the one version of the flow device that you often hear talked about, and basically how it's a pretty simple contraption. It's basically a pipe and fence system. So you pass a pipe through the beaver dam or through a road culvert, and then you kind of fence off the ends of the pipe. And the pipe is basically, creating a leak, right? It's sort of moving water from the upstream side of the beaver dam to the downstream side and regulating the height of that pond. So you can say, hey, I really like having beavers in my on my property. I appreciate all the good stuff they do for the ecosystem, but I don't want to have these acres underwater. I want to be able to use this land, or at least some part of this land, and you can put in one of these flow devices to basically regulate the height of the pond to a level that's acceptable to both humans and beavers. And sort of strike a compromise. And so these, this technique, flow device, the use of flow devices is really widespread now in New England, especially, where beavers are pretty densely populated. The Pacific Northwest is definitely catching on. I'm not aware of them being used a whole lot in New Mexico, although certainly other nearby states, Utah and Colorado, I've seen flow devices there as well. But to me, I mean that's a just a fantastic way of managing some of these conflicts without resorting to lethally removing the beavers.
And the thing is, I mean, lethally removing the beavers, as is demonstrated over and over, doesn't work. They go to a culvert, or you describe a famous example of a Walmart parking lot. You kill them, they come back. You kill them again, they come back again. It's very hard to, because they're so resilient and they're so smart, you basically kind of have to learn to work with them.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there are so many communities I think that are on these very, expensive treadmills where you basically trap out beavers, the beavers return, they wash out the road, you trap them out again, and you're kind of on this. It's this endless cycle of trapping and recolonization and road damage and trapping and recolonization. So you can use these flow devices. You put them in once. They cost a couple $1,000 up front. The maintenance is in most cases very minimal, even non-existent in many places. And you're just solving this problem. You're working with the animal. You're taking care of the problem with a one-time piece of equipment, and basically maintaining these fantastic wetlands in a place where if you trap the beavers out, those wetlands wouldn't exist. So yeah, working with the animal rather than repeatedly killing it, I think is good policy.
One of the stories that you tell that I think is so important is the story of Yellowstone National Park. And probably many of our listeners know that wolves were introduced into Yellowstone, and in some parts of Yellowstone, they improved the ecosystem through keeping elk populations under control. And that whole issue of, what you call trophic cascades, or the kind of cascade of the food chain, essentially, food webs, was really affected by reintroducing a top predator, a carnivore. But that's not the whole story of Yellowstone, and the lesser known part involves beavers. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Yellowstone is just a fascinating story to me. I think that one of the things that we don't appreciate when we look at Yellowstone and so many Western landscapes. I mean Yellowstone is just a microcosm in a lot of ways. I think Yellowstone used to be a giant beaver wetland. You read early naturalists' accounts of what the park looked like, and half of the northern range, which today is basically savanna, was essentially underwater thanks to beavers. And when we eliminated wolves and elk especially proliferated, they basically played the same role that cattle play in many graze systems, which is elk basically took off and just browsed all of that riparian vegetation to smithereens. And they essentially outcompeted beavers, and beavers vanished from the landscape, and all of these important wetlands they'd created dried up, and there was kind of a tremendous loss of amphibian, waterfowl, songbird habitat in the park. So in the 80s and 90s, biologists began to gradually reintroduce beavers to kind of the areas outside of the park, to national forests, to the Gallatin, and those beavers eventually made their way back into the park right around the same time that wolves were reintroduced. So the beavers and wolves were in some sense, I think, working together, right? That you do need the wolves to have the beavers, right? Because you need the wolves controlling the ungulate browsing and grazing, so that beavers have something to eat and build with. But the beavers aren't just kind of a bit player in the story, as they're often cast. When people talk about Yellowstone, they just sort of mention the beavers as sort of like this nice throw-in, where the wolves are the real heroes. To me, beavers were the creature that was most profoundly shaping the park for millennia, and getting beavers back into these systems is so critical. And unfortunately, I think that many streams in Yellowstone are not going to recover. They just suffered too much in the 70 or so years without wolves. They got too degraded, too incised in their banks. And now beavers can't really build there, and they're not going to recover, at least not in kind of not in a human lifetime. I think we've lost beavers from a lot of Yellowstone, and we've lost them permanently. But to me, the takeaway is that we need beavers and wolves working together in a lot of respects, right? We need wolves there pulling back that ungulate browsing so that beavers can thrive and sort of regenerate the rest of the ecosystem. So to me, Yellowstone is sort of this great microcosm for the rest of the American West, in that it demonstrates how these two keystone species, a top carnivore and a rodent, can essentially work together.
Even as the wolves will have beavers for lunch from time to time.
Yeah, and that's that's we don't often think about beavers as this crucial prey source, but definitely, I mean, in places where wolves and beavers co-occur, beavers are one of the staples of wolves' diets for sure.
And so they both help them. I mean, that's I think that's what's hard for people to understand, because I think we analogize to our own lives. Like, how can somebody be helping you and coexisting with you when they're also eating you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, but again, I mean, just having that managed grazing piece, whether the grazing that you're managing is being done by wild ungulates like elk and deer or livestock, having some agent, whether it's the wolf or just more progressive cowboys, essentially, managing that grazing, I think is so crucial for beavers and for the whole riparian community that beavers support.
Now, our ecosystems are so fragmented because of human habitation. In places where there aren't predators to keep them in check, do beavers tend to overrun areas where they don't have predators?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly a concern that you often hear. It's often a justification, I think, for more intensive trapping, where wildlife managers say, well, we need trappers out there playing the role that wolves used to play. And to me, I mean, I don't really. I mean, of course, I'm a shameless beaver apologist, but I don't really buy that. I mean, I think that the primary thing that's limiting beavers is just habitat. Because I mean, beavers are territorial animals. They don't tend to like they don't like each other very much. I mean, they're very family oriented. They live in these colonies of 4 to as many as 10 beavers. And they're very cooperative. I mean, they're cooperative breeders. So they certainly love their own families, but they don't love rival families. And they're very territorial, and so a watershed can only really support so many beavers before you just sort of run out of room for them, and you run out of food for them, and especially in the arid West, where riparian growth is somewhat limited. You start bumping up against sort of the biological carrying capacity of watersheds pretty quickly, I think. So to me, that's the primary thing that's limiting beaver populations is their own territoriality and food availability. I mean, historically, predation probably played some important role, but no, I don't think that in the absence of predators, beavers are going to overpopulate. I think they're basically going to self-regulate, and that's what we've seen in places where research on beaver population dynamics has been conducted.
Right, right. That makes sense. This whole story of beavers requires us to think differently. We tend to, I think, many of us think like engineers. We want to make systems that are clean and neat with straight lines. When we think of water storage, we think of tanks. We don't think of wetlands. But nature works differently, and it's messy, and it's also, more often than not, so much more effective than our engineering ideas. And one of the things I love about this book is that it really kind of shows that difference between our mentality and nature's mentality, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad that you took that away from it. I mean, to me, I think that in the Southwest especially, and also in Eastern Washington, where I live, which is has many of the same water issues as the Southwest. I think that we are starting to encounter the limits or the problems with our water systems, right? I mean, certainly giant concrete dams and enormous reservoirs and thousands and thousands of miles of irrigation ditches. I mean, they made colonization of the West possible in a lot of ways. They made irrigated agriculture possible. I mean, certainly, if you're a farmer or rancher, I don't want to dismiss the importance of our sort of intensive irrigation infrastructure. but at the same time, we're also, again, we're discovering, of course, that that these enormous dam and reservoir systems are just, they have lots of problems, right? I mean, we've seen catastrophic dam breaches in this country that that kill people. I mean, the Oroville Dam in California, which almost collapsed a couple of years ago, would have been a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. I mean, where many of our reservoirs are sort of reaching the end of their sediment lives, where they're basically silting in, and these incredibly expensive projects are turning into these mud puddles essentially, decades before anybody thought that was going to happen. We're obviously drawing down reservoirs really, really rapidly. And climate change, of course, is accelerating all of these problems. So you do start to think, well, maybe there's some way of, of accomplishing some of this water storage work, in a less intensive, ecologically harmful way, and maybe beavers have some important role to play in that, and look, maybe beavers are not single-handedly going to irrigate the American West and save us from climate change. They're not a silver bullet, but they're one of the important tools that we have in the box, especially in some of these kind of upland farms and ranches, where you're sort of upstream of a big reservoir. Getting beavers up in those headwaters is just so crucial. So, again, I don't want to overstate the importance of beavers in solving all of our problems, but from a cost effectiveness standpoint, there's no question they can make an enormous contribution to water security in the arid West, I think. And they don't need permits. That's the best part of all.
Well, and the last chapter of your book is called "Let the Rodent Do the Work," which basically is about a kind of vision of coexistence. If you were to restore streams with, heavy machinery, it would cost a fortune. If you let beavers do it, it's essentially free. So, what is your vision for really coexistence with beavers on this continent?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I mean, I think the point that you just made about the expense of restoring aquatic ecosystems is such an important one. I mean, we have in this country, about half of our river and stream miles are in poor biological condition. They're eroding, they're polluted, they lack biodiversity. They're just in bad shape, and that's hundreds of thousands or even millions of river and stream miles, and that's just so far beyond our capacity to restore. Right? We don't have the time, we don't have the person power, we don't have the money. So it does start to make sense to begin to outsource some of that labor to this rodent who does it for free, and they also do it better than we do in a lot of ways, right? I mean, we're again, we white people, we're not here to see what a fully beavered functional ecosystem looks like. So when we go about restoring degraded streams, oftentimes I think we're basically we're just kind of guessing much of the time about what an ecosystem should look like, and beavers sort of know instinctively, I think, what it should look like. So they do a lot of this restoration work better than we do in many cases, I think. So that's my vision, and the vision of this book, is just trying to create a landscape where these animals can essentially help us address many of our problems. Where we're working with beavers rather than working against them to store water, filter pollution, sequester carbon, create fish and wildlife habitat. Letting the rodent do the work, getting out of the way, and kind of outsourcing some of our labor to these animals, I think is such an important step we can take toward restoring our aquatic systems.
And they're not a charismatic species in a sense like wolves, or, when you talk about saving elephants or tigers or lynxes or so on, but they're so cute.
Yeah, they're totally cute, and I mean, and there's I think there's just so much to recommend them. They're obviously they're ingenious when it comes to doing what they do. They have these really charming, wonderful family lives where they basically, the young beavers live with their parents for the first couple years of their lives and actually help to raise their younger siblings. There's a lot to admire, I think, about beaver family life. They're just so endlessly fascinating to observe.
They're monogamous.
They're generally monogamous. So that's that's kind of a classic American ideal in some ways. And then I guess the thing that I love most about beavers, I think, is that if when you go bird watching and you don't see the bird you're looking for, well, it's kind of a bust, right? You didn't see the birds. Whereas if you go beaver watching, you can go to a beaver pond and wetland complex, and even if you don't see the animals themselves, and you probably won't because they're crepuscular, they come out at dawn and dusk, or they're nocturnal. Even if you don't see the animals themselves, there's still so much fantastic stuff to observe, right? There's all of the dams they build and the ponds they create and the canals they dig. They're really prolific diggers. There's all of the other life that's attracted to beaver ponds and wetlands. You're guaranteed to see some cool amphibians, or a great blue heron, or a wood duck, or what have you. So just to me, visiting a beaver complex is always this incredible ecological education. It's always so full of wonder and delight, whether you see the beavers or not.
Ben Goldfarb is author of the book Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was really fun.
This program is produced in collaboration with the Quivira Coalition, a nonprofit educational organization and community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to the resilience of arid working lands. Their work aims to shift current practices of agriculture and land stewardship to those that produce good food, support meaningful livelihoods in rural places, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira, coalition.org. You've been listening to Down to Earth, a production of the Quivira Coalition and the Radio Cafe. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. If you like this program, please share it with your network. And we'd love your feedback. Go to downtoearth.media, where you can contact us and you can sign up for the mailing list. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. We're producing this show bi-weekly and would love your comments and ideas, so once again, downtoearth.media, and check out the Quivira Coalition, quiviracoalition.org, that's Quivira. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.